Hello everybody, Brooke here, and I have a really fun tutorial for you guys today. So this one is inspired by the freebie that I sent out to my email list for the month of May. One of the big perks of being a part of my email list, being a subscriber, is getting a free download every single month. So I wanted to take this freebie and show you guys some of the possibilities that you can do with it. So first off, I am starting here. I gathered a few mark making utensils, always way more than what I need. That is totally my style. I have a hard time eliminating things right up front. So sometimes it's just nice to pull without restriction, and then after that, kind of narrow down what you want to use. I wanted to get familiar with these supplies again. So I just took my little swatch book that I have, and this is just an old book that I have that I use for paint and mark making, all that good stuff. It's kind of just a catch-all, and sometimes I'm using it as my paint palette, things like that. So I'm just going through and kind of marking out the supplies I think of using. I eliminated some and then others I added. So this is the freebie that you can download. I'm putting that link down in the description below. So make sure to download that if you like this one. So a lot of times my freebies are just a piece of artwork that I've scanned in. This one, I thought it would be really fun to give you some circles, all different sizes from about an inch. I think the biggest one there is 4 inches. And if you have punches, this is perfect to use. Otherwise, you can hand cut these out. But one of my favorite ways to use digital downloads is to add additional marks to them. So even if you have a great printer, a lot of times it can just look a little bit lackluster and flat. Now, when we're doing mixed media, we're adding a lot to it, and a lot of times that amounts in texture and different sorts of interest. So by bringing in different supplies, mark making on top of the digital download, it really brings them back to life. A lot of the times, I won't even just limit myself to mark making supplies. I'll actually bring in paint and stamps, things like that as well. But for this one, since when I created this freebie, I tried to highlight some of like the maybe busier sections of the pages when I put them into circles. I think just marks will be really great on this. So I'm taking my cues from what's already on the page. You can see that I have those dashes there, so I'm just going in and re-emphasizing them. But you don't have to stick to just what's already existing on that page. You can really go as crazy as you want, add all new elements. This is when you can take a download from somebody else or your own, but really make it your own. And then it becomes a mishmash of the person's style and your style. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. It's going to integrate really well into your artwork. So one of the reasons I didn't cut these circles out before I got started is I think it's a lot easier to go off the edge of the circle when you have the full paper intact. Plus, I like to look at this full sheet together rather than the individual circles because I know myself, if I was looking at one circle at a time, I would start to really overthink things and second guess if I put enough in this circle, too much in another circle, versus this one, I'm kind of just working on this whole page at a time. I'm picking one of my pencils or markers and then kind of just scanning the page left to right, top to bottom, seeing where I could add a little bit more interest. My goal isn't to go completely overboard and crazy, but just a little bit extra to bring these to life. You're adding texture as you go along. When your pen hits the paper, you're making small indentations. When you add like a water soluble and smudge it, you are getting that pigment that comes across. So all of these things are just making a beautiful addition to your page and to what you have already on there. I'm bringing in one of my favorite mark making supplies. That's my white correction pen, and it creates beautiful marks over pretty much anything, and this really adds a lot of dimension in. I'm taking my cues from the marks that I already had on the page, but I also have to keep in mind that I didn't design these circles just as they are. So there may be some spaces that have a bit too much blank space or that are a little bit too busy. So now with these additional marks, you can go in and really fine tune this to your desire. I'm going to be showing you here, after I cut out these circles, what I would do with them in my practice. It's so great then to just have them on hand, put them in your stash for future use, and you're ready to use them when it comes to working inside your journals. Now that I finished adding all the additional marks that I want to, I'm going to start cutting these circles out. So if you have circle punches, this is a great time to use them. One of the tips when you're printing out this printable, make sure you're printing at 100%, and that way it's going to fit in for your punches on probably the typical sizes that you may have. That 4-inch one is a pretty big one. You probably don't have that one, but there's the 1 inch, and I think there's a 2, maybe a 2.5 in there. So print at 100%, and then that's going to be the easiest way to get those sizes. So I'm just going to go through here and punch all of these out. I don't have punches for all of these, so the ones that I don't, I'll just cut out with my scissors and freehand cut that, so that's not a big deal. Plus, it's kind of fun to have irregularities in there as well. And don't worry if you're thinking maybe one of the circles needs more marks or whatever, we can always continue to fine tune these after they're completely cut out. Now that I have all of my circles cut out, here comes another fun part. I'm actually going to take the circles and start embellishing them further. So these are going to be perfectly ready to go whenever I use them in my art journal or things like that. So this first one, I started with the biggest one. I had the clearest idea of what I wanted to do, and oftentimes, rather than trying to figure out what you're going to do to all of them, or even several at a time, it's nice when you get an instinct of what you want to do and then you just go for it and not overthink everything. Sometimes when we take that easy decision up front, it starts to inspire us in the rest of what we're working on as well. So I took this 4-inch circle and I backed it in a piece of book text just to give it a little something on the back. Now, you don't need to worry about the front and back at once. Oftentimes, though, when I will use a big circle like this in my journal, I'm putting it in a pocket or an envelope. And so when you would pull that out, you would see the back. Now, when I work in the journal with this circle, whatever journal that may be, I could add to the back then. But I knew I wanted to do this kind of funky stitching around the outside with some fabric. To combine the book text and the front circle together, I did take it to my sewing machine and stitched around the outside a couple times. Nothing too fancy. And that just really helped hold it together. Yes, I did a little bit of glue in the middle, but just enough to be able to take it over to my sewing machine and attach that. So I had this skinny piece of black and white stripe fabric, and I thought it would be really fun to actually stitch with that as if it was thread. So it's a little bit more finicky to do. So I hole punched at the beginning with a small hole punch, maybe 1/8 of an inch, maybe it's smaller, I'm not sure, something smaller than just your traditional hole punched, and then threaded my fabric through it, and then I did go ahead and sew down those loose ends. For this one, I just decided to keep it a little bit more contained. I'm going to move on now to another circle, and I'm looking through my stash, seeing what inspires me. This is a piece of hand-dyed fabric, and I thought the colors were absolutely perfect with these circles. So I don't have a full idea what I'm doing yet. I'm just kind of playing around, seeing what goes. And one of the big tips that I have when you're working with fabrics is don't be afraid to cut them down. When we look at them as a big piece, it's really hard to get an idea of what they're going to look like in small versions, the sizes that we're actually going to be working on when you work in an art journal. Usually your sizes are pretty small, so don't be afraid to cut off a piece, get it off the big piece of fabric that you have, and it's much easier to get an idea of what you want to do with it. For this little circle, I'm thinking it would be fun to create almost a little collage cluster. If you have followed me for a while, you've probably seen my 100-day project. I share that over on Instagram. It's also on my website. But they're little collage clusters with fabric and paper, stitching, a lot of fun embellishments. And so for this one, I thought it'd be fun to make a little cluster out of this. I'm finagling around with my composition, seeing what I want to add and where. I really like that book text behind the circle coming through. It's sitting on top of the fabric, but I just thought this needed a little bit something more. So I'm taking a piece of dyed cheesecloth, and it's going to come underneath and just kind of show itself off to the sides. And now I'm going to do a bit of stitching just through all of those layers. So that's going to work to adhere everything to each other, make it nice and secure, but it also adds a great amount of texture. I'm not pre-planning these stitches too much. I'm kind of just going for it, and it's a really fun look, I think. This thread I actually got at a Creative Reuse store, and it's kind of old, so it's not like the strongest out there. So I typically double it up, and I actually really like the look of it. It's a little bit thicker to double up than normal, but I like the bold look that it gives. Straight stitches are my go-to. That is what I normally do. And actually, it looks like on this one, I actually doubled up the stitches. So I actually went through those holes twice just to make it even more bold. So there's a lot of options, and I like to think that there's really no right or wrong when it comes to doing intuitive stitching like this. It doesn't have to fit the formal stitching rules or things like that. Just kind of go for it and feel. And instead of thinking of it like thread, you can think about it as if you're making art marks with a marker. You're just adding those marks in a more texturized way. Going to do another little one here. They don't all need to be as complicated as that collage cluster. You can stay really simple and still have nice little elements to add to your journal later on. I like to have pre-made elements like this because when I'm working on a journal spread, I don't want to stop and make something like this. So on that one, I just put a little piece of fabric behind it and stitched a couple times messily back and forth. This one I'm going to keep pretty simple as well. All I'm going to do is just back it with a piece of paper. The paper that I chose wasn't quite wide enough, and so I added a piece of washi tape for that remainder part. And that's something that looks super intentional, but really it was born out of a necessity that that paper wasn't quite big enough. Instead of stressing and trying to go and find or make a paper that is big enough, I liked this one. So I went for it, and I just put that washi tape as an extender of sorts. I'm going to sew around the outside of this one, and then it's just going to stay as simple as that. There's room to add on later. I'm going to cap it at just doing these few for you. Hopefully that gives you a really good idea of how you can take these circles that I offer in this freebie and decorate them, embellish them, and have them perfectly ready in your stash. So I hope that you guys enjoyed. Make sure you download that freebie so that you can use it in your own artwork. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I cannot wait to see you next time. This was a really fun one, and I'm happy to share it with you. I will see you next time.